So let's talk a little bit more about what's in the Constitution. I like to throw in this Article 1, Section 4, Clause 2. It says, the Congress shall assemble at least once in every year. Okay? They're saying, look, there's not that much for you to do. It's pretty simple, but you should show up once a year. Okay? I think there's some beautiful quotes I found about simplicity. First of all, consider our Constitution. It is way, way, way smaller, less voluminous than the great majority of any bill that comes across the president's desk nowadays. And there's power and simplicity, isn't there? Thomas Sowell, a famous economist, said this: people who pride themselves on their complexity and deride others for being simplistic should realize that the truth is often not very complicated. What gets complex is evading the truth. I think that applies to the Constitution. This very simple document that outlines some very powerful concepts. Simplicity is powerful. Leonardo da Vinci said this: simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. That's coming from one of the greatest minds ever, right? Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Then Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. says, I would not give a fig for the simplicity this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. And in my mind, that's exactly what the founders did. They had an incredible journey to and challenge to overcome. They're going to wade through this very, very complex idea of creating a new government based on ideas and concepts from history and from logic and reason and their godliness and their morality. 4.5 months they waded through this thing, and then what they came out with on the other end was something that was simple and powerful in its simplicity. That's the power of the Constitution. And that's why what's in the Constitution, the principles that are found therein, are so important. And it can't just be ignored and say, oh, you know, they're just trying their best. No. They understood, and like Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said, he'd give his life for that simplicity on the other side of complexity. I feel the same way about the Constitution. This limited government idea reminds me of a quote by Thomas Jefferson. He says, that government is best which governs least, because its people discipline themselves. If we are directed from Washington when to sow and when to reap, we will soon want for bread. So it is an interesting, in the Russian USSR, right? Their constitution, it guarantees things like bread and water, and yet people wanted to the tune of tens of millions of people dying, even though it was guaranteed. You can write all the laws you want, you can write all the constitutions you want, but in America, bread and water isn't guaranteed, is it? And yet we've been the most prosperous and well taken care of nation in the world, not because of what government did, but because of what people did. All right? So that government is best which governs least, the idea of limited government. Now, the preamble to the Constitution starts out with these words, we the people of the United States. Where could it be more clear that the foundation, the source of all power and authority, is in the people. We the people are ordaining and establishing this Constitution. That's important. Now, that's the preamble to the Constitution. Almost everyone knows we have a preamble. A lot of people memorized it. A thing that I didn't know till recently is there's a preamble to the Bill of Rights. And we're talking about rights in the Constitution. Of course, we're going to discuss the Bill of Rights, correct? So there was a preamble to the Bill of Rights. Now, let me start out by saying something about the Bill of Rights. A lot of people say, oh, the Bill of Rights gives us our rights. Well, these aren't rights that the Bill of Rights gives us. They're rights that God has given us, that the Bill of Rights prohibits government from infringing upon. It is important. That may sound like semantics once again, but that's really important, because if you know where the source is, then you know who's in charge of that right. God gave us the rights. The Bill of Rights is really a bill of prohibitions on government from infringing on those rights. But the preamble to the Bill of Rights says this: the conventions of a number of states, having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire, in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added. Okay, so what happened is when they're going around trying to get the Constitution ratified in these different state conventions, some of the conventions said, look, we don't feel comfortable. We want to have some other restrictive and declaratory clauses. Okay? These words in here, what's misconstruction mean? It means a misinterpretation. Abuse, right? To have bad motives, to do something wrong intentionally. A declaratory clause is something that declares what rights are. And then a restrictive is to say, look, Congress can't do this. Government can't do this. So states said, we will ratify this Constitution if you give us an opportunity to put forth some ideas for a Bill of Rights. Okay? And that's why this preamble, or why the Bill of Rights is written. That's the preamble's explaining. Now, it's not that the Bill of Rights went without controversy, okay? The Federalists are very much against a Bill of Rights, okay? And Alexander Hamilton is one of the prime Federalists, and he makes a good point. It's kind of an interesting point. You have the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists, both who are pro-freedom, but both have different perspectives and points on this. The point he made, he says, I go further and affirm that bills of rights, in the sense and in the extent in which they're contended for, are not only unnecessary in the proposed Constitution, but would even be dangerous. Why would a proposed Bill of Rights be dangerous? He says, quite simply, why declare that things shall not be done which there is no power to do? So why do you need a Bill of Rights that says you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do that? He's saying, look, we never gave him power to do that in the first place. So why try to make a list, because it's not going to be exhaustive, and people will try to say, oh, it didn't say we couldn't do that, so we can do this. And essentially that's what the 10th Amendment's saying, isn't it? 10th Amendment, the last of the Bill of Rights, says this: the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Okay, that's what it's saying. Look, if we didn't list it, it's not there. Okay, so the Anti-Federalists got the Bill of Rights, and looking back, I think that was providential. I think it's good, because look how much they destroyed our God-given rights as it is. At least we have the Bill of Rights, so the government can look at it and say, oh yeah, that's right, we can't do that. It says explicitly we can't. So I think it's nice that we have the Bill of Rights. But the 10th Amendment essentially said what the Federalists are saying, look, if we haven't given you, there is no power then. The 9th Amendment was also thrown in to help satisfy some of the Federalist ideas, which are true ideas. Okay, it says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Okay, just because we list certain rights that we protected doesn't mean there aren't other rights that are God-given and can't be disparaged by government. So you see these concepts showing up. They're there in the Constitution. They make sense. Okay, let's go to the First Amendment. First Amendment is a fairly popular one that's quoted and referred to often. And people talked about these as being our First Amendment rights. Are they our First Amendment rights? No, there are God-given rights that the First Amendment prohibits government from infringing on. Because with our First Amendment rights, right, just we're given the same ideas. Government can take them away because government gave them. That's not true. God gave them. Government can't take them away. These are to prohibit government from infringing on them. We could read through this. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble or to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It's a fairly well known. Some of those are very well known. I want to focus on one that's not brought up that often. Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people peaceably to assemble. Okay, peaceably to assemble is the idea to associate, okay, to come together. Now, if I'm free to associate, does that mean that I have to associate? Obviously not, right? This concept makes it clear why unions are against the idea of freedom. They're contrary to the idea of freedom, because in unions, you're forced, in some unions, I should say, you're forced. And in some unions, in some states, they force you to join a union in order to work in that state. That's a problem, because your freedom to associate means you can, doesn't mean you have to. That's a violation of that First Amendment prohibition on government, the God-given right to associate. If I'm free to associate, does that mean that if I want to form an association, I have to include everyone? No. I can choose who I want to include in my association, right? I don't have to be told by government who will be in my association. It's my choice, because I'm free to associate with whom I'd like to. Doing otherwise would very much infringe on that right. Speaking of associations, Alexis de Tocqueville, one of my favorite, I like the way this guy thinks. He says this: the Americans make associations to give entertainments, to found seminaries, to build inns, to construct churches, to diffuse books, to send missionaries to the antipodes. In this manner they found hospitals, prisons, and schools. Okay? If it's proposed to inculcate some truth or to foster some feeling by the encouragement of a great example, they form a society. Wherever at the head of some new undertaking you see the government in France, or a man of rank in England, in the United States you'll be sure to find an association. Why? Because that's what free people do. If they see a problem or see something they want to get done, they go fix it. They don't say, hey, government, go fix that. You guys take care of it. They say, well, I'm free. I can make choices. I can influence others to inspire them to do good things. Let's go form an association to do this and this and this and this. That's what Alexis de Tocqueville points out as one of our success factors. The idea that we don't look to government to fix our problems. We look to ourselves and we just do it. It's a beautiful concept. It's kind of been lost today. We're very good at saying, well, there's an agency for that, there's an agency for that. What we should say is, there doesn't need to be an agency. We can just use the power of persuasion, the power of choice. Let's work together and get something done. All right? That's especially, in my mind, that's especially abused at maybe at the local levels, where we look for and ask for and apply for grants, etc., from top-down money and authority and therefore control, and we don't get to do what we want to do in the first place. Why don't we just form together and make an association and go do it?